All right, if you got a Bible, go ahead and turn with me to that passage, Deuteronomy chapter 5. Deuteronomy chapter 5. We'll be there here in just a bit. In the year 1984, the movie Amadeus was released in theaters across the world. It is considered by some to be one of the best films of all time. The movie tells the story of two musical composers, a guy named Antonio Salieri and another guy you may have heard of before named Mozart. As the story goes, in the movie at least, Salieri loved Mozart's music. He wanted to be a renowned composer in the same vein as Mozart. So much so that in the movie he makes a vow with God that he will live a devout religious life if God will make him the greatest composer of all time. He understands God to have agreed with this arrangement. Don't ask me how you discover such a thing in an arrangement like that, but he feels confident that God has agreed to the deal. But time goes on, and Salieri still feels plagued by his own mediocrity as a composer. It gets worse when one day he actually meets his hero, Mozart, in person. And to say the least, Mozart is very unimpressive in person. He's a bit of a drunk, he's very immature, and he seems to have no interest in piety or devotion to God whatsoever. And yet, his music is far better than Salieri's is. Everybody knows Mozart's music. Hardly anyone knows of Salieri's. This begins to burn at Salieri from the inside out. He does not understand how someone so foolish, so immature, so juvenile seems favored by God while he himself is mostly overlooked and forgotten, despite his devotion to God. Salieri eventually becomes so bothered by this perceived cosmic injustice towards him that he formulates a plan. He is going to deceive Mozart into composing a new piece of music. Salieri will then murder Mozart before he finishes it, steal the composition, and release it as his own music, as his own creation. Then he thinks, I will finally have the glory and the recognition that I've always wanted as one of the world's great composers. The plan ultimately fails. Salieri never achieves notoriety, and he goes to his grave thinking of himself as, quote, the patron saint of mediocrity. Quite the story, right? Bet you didn't know there was that much drama playing out behind the scenes of ancient classical music. They could probably make it into a reality show if they wanted to. Now, here's the thing. Some of the movie, we're pretty sure, as with many historical movies, was embellished for effect. So that's another way it could be a modern reality show, because most modern reality show is not actually reality at all. But the movie itself did really, really well. It was a box office hit. It was nominated for 53 awards. It won 40 of them, including the Academy Award for Best Picture. It was also parodied in an episode of Family Guy, which to me is the best measure of a film's success, is if it's parodied in the show Family Guy. But one could argue that the reason this movie did so well and it connected so widely with audiences is because it centers on one of the most universally understood and shared human experiences, that of envy of another person. The story is about one man who is envious of another. One person who thought of themselves as ordinary and thought of someone else as extraordinary and therefore spent their entire life trying to be like the other extraordinary person. And that truly is a story as old as time, that of envy. Earlier in the series, we actually referenced the story in the Bible of Cain and Abel, found in Genesis chapter 4. That story really plays out as a real-life version of the fictional depiction of Salieri and Mozart. It's about two brothers who each bring sacrifices to God. God receives Abel's offering, but not Cain's. And Cain is so jealous, so envious of his brother Abel that he ends up killing him as a result. What's even more significant, I think, about the story is that it is the first story we read about after sin enters the human predicament. One of the first things that happens after sin happens is envy. Jealousy of other people that we consider to be better than us, more well off than us, more favored than we are. And I think anyone in the room who is very self-aware likely knows that they are sometimes driven by envy. Here's the way Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 4 actually puts it. He says, "And I saw that all toil and all achievement spring from one person's envy of another. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind." So the author of Ecclesiastes says that all toil, in other words, people's desire to work hard in life, and all achievement springs from envy, the desire to be like or become like someone else. Now, we've talked before about the complexity of the book of Ecclesiastes. Large portions of this book actually read a little bit like a cynic's take on the world. So take that into account as you read lines like this. But still, I think we could see where he's coming from on his sentiment towards envy. I mean, if I'm honest in my own life, I am often motivated by the desire to be like or become like someone else, or just to have what someone else has. I remember about 6 years ago, Anna and I bought our first house. We were so proud of this purchase, right? It makes you feel like a real adult when you do it. And it was way more house than we thought we would be able to afford. It was a 4-bed, 3-bath, 2 stories, private back patio that was awesome. I remember being amazed that this house had a full-size bathroom inside the primary bedroom, and just thinking that was like the coolest, most grown-up thing I could ever think of, was to have something like this. I felt like when we bought that house, I felt like I had arrived as an adult human being. Like my life finally made sense. Everything about the house was great. Felt like I was on top of the world. That is, until one day I went and saw a house that a friend of mine had bought. And all of a sudden, I didn't like my house very much as a result. Theirs was a 4-bedroom too, but it had 3.5 bathrooms. That's so much better than 3. It was 2 stories as well, but it had a yard. Our house didn't really have much of a yard at the time. They had a bathroom inside the primary bedroom too, but their bathroom was way bigger than ours, like so much room for showering and using the bathroom. It was unbelievable, really. You wouldn't believe it. And after visiting their slightly better house, it's amazing how quickly I went from really loving our house to thinking that our house was kind of underwhelming, to be honest. Took a split second to change my entire outlook on what I had. All of a sudden, I felt like I needed to work harder. I needed to ask for a raise, not necessarily because it was good to work hard or because I needed more money. None of that. It was because I saw something that someone else had that I wanted. That's what the author of Ecclesiastes is actually saying in chapter 4. He's saying all toil, all achievement spring from one person's envy of another. This is the power that envy can exert over us as human beings. If you were to ask the average person in this room right now why we are driven to achieve more and more in our life, I would bet it is that most of us have a picture in our heads of the type of person we want to be. But here's the thing. I bet if we thought about it very critically at all, that picture in our heads of the person we want to be is at least loosely based on someone else. Someone else we know, maybe a friend of ours, family member of ours, who has what we consider to be a pretty ideal life. Maybe some public figure, some social media personality, some celebrity who has a lot of success, however we personally choose to define that word success. My point is that envy is a pretty universal human experience. And chances are, envy motivates and fuels far more of our actions and decisions than we probably realize right now that it does. I would bet that a lot of our lives are actually driven by us wanting what someone else has, whether that's their house or their possessions or their income or their job or their friendships or their marriage or their singleness, their family situation, most anything else, really. How much of our effort and energy as human beings is spent wanting what someone else has? I'd be willing to bet it's more than we realize. And so it's into that universal human experience of envy that the 10th and final commandment reads as follows. Look with me at Deuteronomy 5, verse 21. And you shall not covet your neighbor's wife. You shall not desire your neighbor's house, or his field, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. Last week we mentioned that the word neighbor in the Old Testament can refer to pretty much anyone that you come into contact with. It's basically the same as saying the word someone in English. So here in the 10th and final commandment, we are told that we are not to covet anything that belongs to our neighbor, anything that belongs to another person. Coveting is when you want someone else's life, or at least some component of it, as your own life. It's when you see something that someone else has and you think to yourself, I must have that in order to be happy, to be complete, to be satisfied with my life. It's when we believe functionally that fullness of joy is found in obtaining something that someone else has. Then the passage in Deuteronomy chapter 5 actually gives us some examples of some things that ancient Israelites might have been inclined to covet. So it mentions their neighbor's wife, or we could infer from that their husband. We could probably add to that coveting the type of relationship that our neighbor has with their husband or wife, or simply coveting that they are married if we are not. We also aren't to covet our neighbor's house or land, it says in the passage. So thinking things like, I just wish we had a house that size. I just wish we had a house in that neighborhood, that part of town, in that school district. I wish our backyard looked like their backyard. I wish I had the creativity to renovate our house like they have the creativity to renovate theirs. It then mentions coveting your neighbor's male or female servant. Now, obviously, to modern ears, it sounds to us like there's a much bigger problem there than just coveting in that particular situation. And just for reference, we've done some work before here on Sundays talking about ancient forms of slavery and how they actually differ pretty substantially from the type that you and I tend to think of. If you want to study further on that, I'll actually link to some of those teachings that we've done before in the readable PDF of this sermon that we post later today. But the point being made in the passage is simply that we should not covet any aspect of another person's life. Anytime that you and I look at another person, look at their situation and go, my life would be better if I had what they have, the scriptures would call that coveting. Now, some of us might be wondering, why is that such a big deal in the Bible? Why is it such a big deal to covet? I mean, certainly jealousy can be a bad thing. I think most of us could agree with that. But is it really one of the top 10 most important things in life we shouldn't do? I think to many people, coveting would appear to be relatively harmless on the surface. Is it really bad to just want something that someone else has? Chances are, coveting what another person has is not hurting the other person. They might even be flattered that we want aspects of their life as our own. And according to Ecclesiastes chapter 4, apparently it's the motivation behind most everything we do. So is it really that bad to simply covet someone else's life or possessions or situation? That's a great question. I'm glad you asked. Yes, it is bad, and here's why. I want to give you what I would consider to be 3 negative impacts of coveting or envy from the scriptures so that maybe you can understand why God would feel so strongly about warning his people against coveting as a result. So, here they are. First problem with coveting, I would say, is that coveting kills contentment. It kills contentment. One of the fastest ways to be really unhappy with your life is to continually compare it to someone else's life. Specifically, someone with more or better than what you have. So think of my own story earlier about us purchasing a home. I was really happy, really proud, really content with the house that we bought until the moment I saw a better house than mine. Then all of a sudden, this house that I liked a lot seemed kind of boring by comparison, kind of average, kind of basic. And meanwhile, nothing had actually changed about my own situation. I just happened to notice somebody with a little bit more than what I had. Coveting kills contentment in our heart. Some of us in the room are really, really content with our income level, with our job, with our spouse, with our stage of life, you name it. We're really happy with all of it, as long as we stay off Instagram. But as soon as we get on Instagram and we start scrolling through other people's lives, or at least what they post about their lives, all of a sudden, there are about 1,400 things that we absolutely must have and cannot be happy without. I read this the other day. Recent leaves us with the impression that others are doing better than us. Comparing our lives to those that we perceive as better off is referred to as an upward comparison and is damaging to our psychological well-being and the way we view ourselves. The quote, highlight reel nature of social media. So I need you to hear this. Your life cannot possibly measure up to what other people post on social media. And here's why. Because even their life does not measure up to what they post on social media. It's their highlight reel. But when we spend hour after hour after hour scrolling through other people's highlight reels, a narrative starts to form in our minds that their life is better than ours and that our life cannot possibly be worthwhile or enjoyable. Coveting kills contentment. And hear me, envy is a game that you can never win. It's a hamster wheel that you cannot ever get off of. And here's why. Because someone will always have more than you. Someone else will always have something that you want. Someone will always be one step ahead, one life stage ahead, one tax bracket ahead of you. And if you live your life motivated by envy, driven by envy, you will be perpetually discontent about your life. So follow me here. What if, in an effort to keep us from being perpetually discontent with what we have, God tells us not to continually covet other people's stuff? What if that's actually the God of the universe looking out for our general quality of life? What a gracious, thoughtful, intentional command that would be from the God of the universe to us. Coveting kills contentment. Second thing, second problem with coveting, it kills community. It kills community. So the more envious we are of what other people have, the less we are able to live in meaningful, deep relationship with those people over time. Let me try and show you what I mean from the scriptures. This is James chapter 4, verses 1 and 2. Listen closely to what it says. What causes fights and quarrels among you as followers of Jesus? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? For instance, you desire but do not have, so you kill. You, what's that next word? Covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. So according to James chapter 4, sometimes the reason that we experience conflict with other followers of Jesus is because we actually covet what they have, aspects of their life. And maybe that sounds far-fetched to you, but just think about a few scenarios with me really quick. Single folks in the room. Have you ever found yourself with another single friend of yours when they start dating someone and all of a sudden you find yourself very jealous, very, very envious of your friend? Married folks, have you ever found yourself wishing that your spouse would look or act or interact with you the way that a friend's spouse interacts with them? Those of you with kids, ever found yourself envious of how well behaved or how well performing your friends' kids are compared to your own? Folks nearing retirement age in the room, have you ever found yourself jealous of how much earlier your friends are able to retire than you, or how much better prepared they are for retirement compared to you? Okay, and then in any of those situations, have you ever found that jealousy, that envy, that covetousness causing bitterness and resentment in you towards those friends of yours? You ever found it bubbling up into conflict and quarrels with them as a result? Ever find yourself nitpicking certain aspects of their life and getting frustrated at them, but the frustration actually isn't about any of the things that you're choosing to nitpick in their life. It's actually about the overall jealousy and envy you have of their life in general. Okay, that's exactly what James 4 is saying. Why are there fights and quarrels among you as followers of Jesus? Well, it's because you covet, but you cannot get, so you fight. Coveting kills community. You cannot build a meaningful relationship with someone that you are actively harboring resentment towards. Here's another way to think about it. Romans chapter 12, verse 15 tells us as followers of Jesus that we should, quote, rejoice with those who rejoice. That's a command, that we should rejoice with others in the community of faith that rejoice. The vision for a community of God's people is that when something worthy of rejoicing happens in another person's life, we would be able to, as a community of faith, we would be able to rejoice along with them. When someone gets a promotion at work that they've worked hard to get, we would celebrate with them. When someone gets married, we celebrate with them. When someone buys a house or graduates or gets a job, we would celebrate those life events with them. The goal is that whenever someone celebrates something within a community of faith, we get to celebrate with them. But here's the thing. Coveting will not allow us to do that. Coveting will not allow us to rejoice with those who rejoice. Coveting causes us to see other people's joys and successes as a threat to our own joy and success, as competition to our own life, as little more than a reminder of what we don't have that they do. One author that I read actually said that coveting actually inverts what Romans 12 tells us to do. It means that when something good happens to someone else, we secretly mourn because it's not happening to us. We mourn with those who rejoice. And when something bad happens to someone else, sometimes we secretly rejoice because it means that we're better off by comparison. We rejoice at those who mourn. It inverts the whole process. And listen, it is difficult to describe just how detrimental that type of thinking is to us becoming the type of Jesus-centered family that we want to become here at our church. Coveting kills community. It kills the ability to have deep, meaningful relationships with other people. And then lastly, coveting contradicts grace. It contradicts grace. So covetousness says, it operates on the principle that sounds something like, I always have less than I deserve. That's covetousness. I always have less than what I deserve. Grace, on the other hand, says, I always have more than what I deserve. Covetousness feeds the lie that what God has given us is quite literally never enough. That we're always lacking something that we need. We're always missing something that our lives would be better off if we had. And it prevents us from seeing the grace that God has set before us in the here and now. The things that he's blessed us with, given us in our lives right this second. which means if we want to stop coveting, we need an intentional reset on the grace that we've received and how it's far better than everything we don't yet have. Now, as always, an understanding of grace has to start with an understanding of what we've been given through Jesus, specifically through his life, death, and resurrection. So take a look with me. Opening lines, 2 Peter chapter 1. Here's what Peter says there. Grace and peace be yours in abundance through the knowledge of God and of Jesus our Lord. His divine power has given us everything we need for a godly life through our knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness. Quote, everything that we need. Notice what Jesus himself says in John chapter 6. He's talking here about bread, which in context is a metaphor for his own body. He says this, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. Okay, so could we not describe coveting as a continual, unending thirst and hunger for more? That's what coveting is. It's a continual longing that never quite gets satisfied in our life. And if so, Jesus just told us that whoever comes to him, whoever believes in him, will hunger and thirst no more. The promise made over and over again in the scriptures is that understanding the grace of God is what allows us to resist the mindset that we never have enough. It teaches us that when we are inclined to believe we don't have what we need, we should go to Jesus, where we can be reminded that in him we've been given everything we need and more. But I also don't think it stops just with understanding the grace of God through Jesus. God's grace is centered on the person and work of Jesus, but it also goes beyond that. God's grace is also just a way of talking about his ongoing, tangible provision for us in all arenas of life. So I'll give you a little Bible experiment to do. The next time you sit down for time in the scriptures, I want you to turn to the Psalms in the Bible, and I want you to just count how many times the psalmists mention giving thanks. I'll go ahead and set expectations for you. It's a lot, like pretty often. It's like one of the most frequently repeated phrases in the Psalms, possibly in the entire Bible. And you know what's even more fascinating about it? The biblical authors evidently don't even think you have to be in a good mood to give thanks. Like, you don't have to be having a good day at all for you to thank God for what you have. Some of the psalmists give thanks to God while people are literally hunting them down in order to kill them. People give thanks in the Bible right after horrible tragedy strikes their family and those that they love. Paul gives thanks when he feels like he has plenty and when he feels like his life is withering away in prison. When he has plenty and when he's in need. Giving thanks, evidently, in the Bible is an all-season activity. It's something you can do regardless of what you have or what you don't have, something you can do regardless of how well or how poorly your life is going at the moment. In 1 Thessalonians 5, it literally says it this way, quote, give thanks in all circumstances. In how many circumstances? All. For this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. So if you are one of the millions upon millions of people that have desperately wanted to know what God's will for your life is, I have good news for you. We just figured it out. God's will for your life is that you would give thanks in all circumstances. God's will is for you to give thanks. Gratitude, actual conscious gratitude, is one of the most valuable weapons at your disposal when it comes to fighting discontentment and covetousness in your life. That's the case that the Bible makes over and over and over again. But honestly, you don't even have to trust the Bible to believe that that's how it works. Just plain old psychology is showing us that this is how it works. Gratitude actually erodes away at a feeling of discontentment in our life. Choose in every situation, in every circumstance, to be thankful and see if that doesn't melt away at least some of your envy and discontentment over time. So this past Wednesday night, got together with my life group, had Friendsgiving. I know a lot of you guys did that this week too. And we just sat around the table, ate really, really good food. Our life group is pretty stellar at food preparation. It was amazing. Sat around the table, ate delicious food, and then we just spent like 30 minutes going around the table and talking about all the things that we're grateful for in our life. My heart was full. And you know what I didn't do when I got home from Friendsgiving? I did not look at my house and go, man, I don't like my house. Wish I had a bigger house. I'm kind of discontent with my life right now. Wish my life was better. If you choose to fill your heart with gratitude over and over and over again, I'm not saying it'll happen instantly, but I'm saying over time it will melt away at the discontent and covetousness in your life. So here's what I would recommend. If you struggle with any type of envy or covetousness or discontentment in your life, and this is a serious suggestion I'm about to give you, at some point in the next few days, maybe this afternoon, block out some time, grab a pen, some paper or a journal, and just write down a list of things that are evidence of God's grace in your life. I'm dead serious about this. Some of you are going to roll your eyes at that, and that's totally fine. You can continue being discontent and dissatisfied with your life. But for the rest of us, what we should do is write down evidences of God's grace in our life. If you're a follower of Jesus, you can start with the one that we mentioned earlier, God's grace towards you through Jesus. That's a great place to start. His grace in sending his son to earth and to the cross and back from the grave to save you from a variety of things that you were caught up in. That's a pretty significant evidence of God's grace towards you. From there, just take a survey of your life. So what do you have that you can be thankful for? Now notice I did not say what are you thankful for, because that's kind of the point of this whole exercise, right? Most of us don't instinctively notice and express gratitude for these things in our life. Most of us take them for granted a majority of the time. So it's going to take some intentional, undistracted time and thoughtfulness to do. But what do you have to be thankful for in your life? How about your job? Maybe some of you are like, I hate my job. Okay, that's fine, but you do have a job, which is more than a lot of people can say. So there are probably aspects of your job you can be thankful for, even if it's just the paycheck. If you're in school, there's another one. That's an incredible opportunity. Even if you're racking up thousands of dollars of student debt, still you can be thankful that those types of loans are available and that in theory one day you'll be able to pay them back. How about a roof over your head? There's one I think at least most of us have. How about the ability that most of us have to go purchase and eat food whenever we need it? For a lot of us, how about the ability to go out to eat at any of the fantastic restaurants that exist here in our city? Knoxville, I would argue, has a disproportionately fantastic food and beer and coffee scene for the size city that we are. A lot of us have the financial ability to go enjoy that stuff pretty much any time. That is God's common grace towards us as Knoxvillians. How about living in one of the best regions of the country to live in, especially this time of year? Fall in East Tennessee is unbelievable. How about your life group, your friends, your family? Okay, maybe some of us will have to work on the family thing, but how about the people in your life that you can be grateful for? I would be willing to bet that if you put forth just a little bit of time, a little bit of energy, a little bit of thoughtfulness, you could find things in your life that are evidences of God's grace towards you. Things to be thankful for and actively express gratitude to God for. Those things do exist. Our minds just tend not to gravitate towards them when we are obsessing over all the things we don't yet have. All the things we wish we had. All the things that our friends and our neighbors and our coworkers have that we have convinced ourselves that we are miserable without. So what I'm saying is that motivated and empowered by the grace of God, let's choose to give thanks in all circumstances. Let's choose to call our attention time and time and time again, even when we don't feel like it, to the things that we do have, to the things that we have been given. So gratitude is the first way to resist the pull towards envying and coveting what others have. I'll give you one more that we're going to actually talk about a lot over the next few weeks as a church family. You ready? Generosity. Generosity. Now, I realize that nobody likes it when the church brings this one up. And that's fine, because here I'm not even talking about giving money to the church or to our church or to any church. That matters, but that's not even what I'm talking about this morning. I'm talking about giving regularly of your money and your possessions to other people in need of it. That's generosity in the Bible. Now, here's why I say that generosity is absolutely vital to fighting discontentment and envy in your heart. Discontentment and envy and coveting feed off of one fundamental flawed belief, and it sounds like this: I never have enough. That's the lie. I never have enough. But generosity teaches us to operate off of exactly the opposite principle. Generosity chooses to operate on the principle, I always have more than enough. The only way to be generous with our money and our possessions is by assuming that we either already have more than we need or that we will have what we need even though we choose to be generous. Generosity actually teaches us at a physical, tangible level that we do have more than we need. Every time we send money to that friend who's having a hard time, we are training our hearts to believe that we have more than we need. Every time you look through your closet and you give away the half of it or more in there that you do not need, you are training your heart to believe that God has provided you with more than enough. Generosity actually forces your heart to operate on the principle that God has provided for you and will continue to provide for you in the future. You're teaching your brain to remember that you are operating in an abundance and not out of a deficit. Which means that if you make generosity a pattern of your life as a follower of Jesus, you know what I'd be willing to bet happens as a result? I would bet that your heart starts to believe that principle more and more tangibly, more and more consistently. If you want to be more and more done with envy and coveting in your life, generosity is a key part of how you will get there. Now, a bit later during the announcements this morning, I've actually got some really specific ways that we as a church are going to participate in generosity together this Christmas season. Really pumped about that, just in case you need some tangible ideas to go on. So we'll talk more about that here in a bit. But for now, I just want you to consider using generosity as a tangible method to push back on the mentality that says, I don't ever have enough. Does that make sense? Okay, so we're out of time this morning. Here's what we're going to do next. As we do every single week, we're going to go to the tables together throughout this room, all of us who are followers of Jesus, and we're going to remember the greatest act of generosity that the world has ever seen, which was at the cross of Jesus. The moment where God did not even withhold his own son, for our benefit. And as we've already mentioned, that's where any of our generosity has to start as followers of Jesus, is at the cross, with an understanding of the cross. It's where any amount of being done with envy and coveting has to start in our lives. So every week we go to the tables together and we remember God's generosity to us. And then we ask him by his Spirit to help us remember that he and what we've already been given is more than enough. He is the bread of life, and anyone who comes to him will never go hungry, will never be thirsty. His divine power has given us everything that we need for a godly life through our knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness. When we go to the tables, that is what we're acknowledging. That's what we're remembering. That's what we're celebrating together. So we're going to do that together as we respond. Let me pray for us. Father, we thank you for who you are. We thank you for your unbelievable generosity towards us by sending your Son to the cross and back from the grave. God, our prayer is that you would make us a group of people that actively remember that actively acknowledge that in every way that we can. God, our prayer is that you would set us free from the lie that we never have enough, that you are not a provider, that you're not trustworthy. God, that you would set us free from the never-ending lie that more life, that more joy is found in having things that other people have. God, I think so many of us just feel stuck in this place where we're perpetually dissatisfied with who we are and what we have. And I got to think that at least a lot of that is because we're just regularly comparing and contrasting ourselves to others. And God, we're aware that harms us. It harms the community that we're a part of. It harms relationships that we exist within. And so, God, our prayer this morning is that you would set us free from all of that. If we're followers of Jesus, that you would remind us that we are free from all of that. And God, that you would reset us on who you are as a provider, as trustworthy, as true, as generous, as extravagantly gracious towards us. And God, that through realizing that, you would transform us once and for all. So God, would you help us? This is not natural for us as human beings to just continually think about how much we do have. God, our instincts are exactly the opposite from that. And so, God, we need tons of your Spirit's help to realign us with that way of thinking, that way of reflecting. But God, we know you're faithful to do it. We know that you desire to create that posture in us. And so, God, we ask for your Spirit's presence with and within and among us this morning as we respond to who you are and what you've done. We ask all this for your glory, for our good. Amen. You're invited to respond with us.